welcome to another family meeting. My name is Cindy Hovington. I am the founder of Curious Neuron, and every single Monday night at 8:30 p.m. we join here on Zoom and we chat about various topics. I was a little late tonight because of meltdown in my house. So we had to figure that meltdown out, and just as an advice or some tip, um, I try to follow little tips here and there, but there was something that really worked tonight, just in case you want to implement this one night. I think it's Our Mama Village, Jessie at Our Mama Village. She talks about kind of bringing in the future and saying, you know, like, so my son wanted to watch Mickey Mouse. It's bedtime, but he wanted to see Mickey Mouse. And I said, you know what, we really can't do it now, which led to a meltdown. And I said, what if, you know, tomorrow, let me know what would you like to see, which episode? And then it got him thinking, and it distracted him from the fact that he wanted to do it right now. And it got him thinking, okay, I think tomorrow I want to watch the one with the haunted house. I'm like, that's amazing. I love that one. You know what? After breakfast tomorrow, we can watch that one. Can you remind me in the morning to watch that specific episode? And then the meltdown just went down. And I introduced a couple weeks ago Meltdown Mountain, which is a printable up on my website. And he said, Mommy, I'm starting to feel myself going back down the mountain. So that visual that I have around our home of a mountain, and you're climbing up the mountain, and now he understood. So it took a few minutes, about 15 minutes, but you know, it works, and there are ways when it comes to tantrums. That aside, hi to everybody. If you are new, let us know in the chat. You can chat and ask your questions privately, or you can ask a question and we could join you. I'll unmute you if you want to ask a question. Tonight we have two special guests. We have two psychologists, Jenna and SHANNA, who are here with us tonight from helping families thrive. And we are here to talk about childhood anxiety. For those of you who know me, I studied mental health, not childhood anxiety, but during my doctorate degree, I studied schizophrenia, and I understand that such a large percentage of mental illness or, you know, certain disorders start when you're teenagers or when you're young. So I think it's really important for us to have this conversation around mental health and young kids, so that we can know which symptoms to look for or how we can help them and act quickly, so that we can, you know, seek the right person. So before we start, oh, there's already let me just see in the chat. Where is the chat? Oh, hi everyone, perfect. First time, hi Darlene, welcome to the family meeting. Every single Monday is a different topic. Sometimes I have a guest and sometimes it's just me chit-chatting. And before we begin, we're almost done. I'm just waiting for everybody to join. Last week, our topic was about mom rage or postpartum anger. And I have to say that I was completely blown away by how many emails I got from mothers who felt that they'd never had the opportunity to really speak about it or to understand it. And part of what I want to do here with Curious Neuron, of course, I talk about child development and parenting, but a huge part of parenting, the majority of it, is ourselves. If we are not okay, we cannot help our children with their own emotions and their own issues. We need to take care of ourselves. So I want to set the first Monday in January. I decided to make it about postpartum anger. And we're going to have, I've worked all weekend to try to create this challenge that we can work on this together and you know, have more dialogue around this, because we're all in this together. You know, you are not alone. And that's part of something that just came up with Curious Neuron. I was talking about research and then it became about anger because, you know, it's something that we all experience. And I just want you to know that you're not alone. So without waiting any longer, please invite, oh, did I invite everybody in? Everybody's here, perfect. Again, you can ask your questions. We're going to have a chit chat about, I'm just going to unmute you, ask to unmute, and SHANNA, you are here, ask to unmute. So we're going to talk about childhood anxiety. Hi, Jenna, hi, SHANNA.
Hello.
Hi, I'm just going to bring up my volume so I could hear you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this family meeting. So the way that we do it is just I'll ask you a couple questions and then we'll leave it up to everybody who's here as a Q&A. It's very informal, like that's why it's called family meetings. It's just relaxed and we're trying to learn from you and, you know, to understand parenting a little bit more and to understand our children. So let's start off with the basics. what's the difference between worry and anxiety? How would we be able to know the difference?
Yeah.
Jenna, do you want to take it, or do you want me to take it?
Yeah, I can do it. So worry is an emotion that everybody has, and so is anxiety. And when we're kind of trying to differentiate the question of whether or not it's clinically significant, we're really looking at how much it interferes with a child's daily life. So we're often not super concerned about the content of worries because those can vary pretty dramatically from child to child and shift. It's more the intensity of the worries and how much it gets in the way. So that would really be what I would be looking for. Like, is this impacting this child's ability to do things that we would expect from a child of this developmental age? So going to school or preschool, go to bed on time, or, with support, how much support do they need, interacting with other people, how much is it impacting their ability to socialize, if there's some social anxiety. So those would be the questions I would be asking a parent if they were concerned.
Yeah, and when I think about anxiety and worry, they're like cousins to each other, really. And both of them have, I want to make sure that we frame this in terms of they're not things that should be avoided or quelched necessarily, right? Like they're a normal part of the range of human emotion. But when we talk often with kids about anxiety, we talk about, no, sometimes it is trying to help you, right? Like there's an alarm in your brain that's useful. The problem is that you're kind of having random alarms going off at the wrong time. It's like having a fire alarm in your house. It's a useful thing to have a fire alarm, right? A smoke detector. The problem is yours is a little sensitive. It's a little trippy. So we just have to, we have to calibrate it a little bit. And so that comes back to what Jenna was saying about, it's not trying to get rid of the alarm completely. It's just trying to train your brain to know, oh, I understand mine is a little bit more sensitive. So this is when I can listen to it and it's being helpful to me, and this is when it's not. And when it's stopping me from participating in my life, right? That's when we know that it's getting in the way.
I'm thinking of young children. I'm thinking of the anxieties that come around, like, let's say sleep, going off to school for the first time, or daycare with young kids. And there was a study that I think I summarized this a few months ago, where parents, or even social anxiety, where parents, because we want to protect our kids, we might, keep sleeping in the same bed with them for months and months and months and years, and stay with them. And when they wake up, we know that they're afraid of it. So we kind of protect them. If it's a social anxiety, we might say, it's okay, you don't have to speak to anybody. And again, with the need to nurture and protect them. But it said that this could sort of impede the progression, or a child who has anxiety, it's not going to help by doing that. Is this what you see as well?
Absolutely.
The number one issue.
Yeah. It's really, the most effective treatment is actually working with parents to learn how to not do that. That's actually what a big part of treatment is for anxiety. And I want to say that this is really hard. Like, it's not just as easy as not rescuing your child from these things, because there's so many factors that are at play with this. But one of the analogies when I'm talking with kids and families that I like to use around anxiety is that the brain is trying to escape. That's what anxiety does. It's your flight or fight response. And so every time you escape a feared situation, your anxiety grows. And so every time our child gets out of something scary, in the moment, their anxiety goes down, right? But over time, that actually taught them that was a situation to be feared. And so their brain learns that was really dangerous, and now I'm safe. So I should keep doing that thing that kept me safe.
Yeah.
So like, for example, let's say I have a phobia of bridges, right? And we live in Seattle, Lake Washington area. So there's a big bridge to get over the lake, and it's the fastest way. But let's say I'm afraid of that. I think it's going to collapse. So every day I take a longer route and I drive around. Every day I do that, I get to the other side and I go, yeah, I'm safe. Like, that was a really good choice. I'm safe, right? My brain does that.
Yeah.
But that bridge never collapsed, right? I would have been equally as safe. But every time I do that, I reinforce those neural pathways in my brain that this is how I have to cope with these feelings, is to avoid it. And that's how my brain and body are going to stay safe. But that's not the case.
Got it. We're going to, we're posting this week. I'll be announcing it tonight. We're talking about childhood anxiety all week. And the post tomorrow will be about symptoms. Can you explain a bit of those symptoms? So I know a child, for example, who often complains about stomach aches or pains is one of the symptoms, which that's one that I've recognized a lot with like in my environment or with people that I know. What other symptoms should parents be looking out for?
I think avoidance and refusal are two of the biggest with kids. So, yeah, trying to avoid going to school, trying to avoid going to preschool, avoiding feared situations. So that can look like not approaching kids at the playground or not responding to other kids' bids for interaction.
Is there an age where that is normal for a child to be undergoing? I'm thinking of a very young child who, might be starting daycare and is, still at the age where they can't really verbalize. So at what point would something like that be a concern for a parent?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of always going back. Absolutely, some of this is normal, right? Like a lot of kids have difficulties with preschool for the first couple of days or even the first couple of weeks or a new school environment. Really looking at how much distress is this causing for this child and how different is it from what we might expect for that age group. So if a preschool teacher is commenting like, hey, most of the kids have now warmed up and this kiddo is struggling, it might be a red flag. Like, how can we support this kid a little bit more so that they can kind of gradually face some of those things that are really easy. It's really easy to engage in avoidance. That's one of the tricky things about it, is that when that alarm goes off, avoidance is just really easy. You just don't do that thing, right? Like you don't have to take much action, you just take no action. And so avoidance can be a really tricky thing to kind of overcome.
This is such an interaction too. I mean, just like acting out behaviors, challenging behaviors like hitting, negotiating, arguing, and acting in behaviors, what we would consider like keeping things inside, like anxiety. They all can be so linked to early temperament, right? So early temperament, some little tiny ones we can see they're slow to warm. They tend to watch first and then engage, right? Rather than the baby that's in the grocery cart, it's like hi and flirting with everyone, But so part of this, it's this balance between recognizing the temperament of the kid that you have, right? And then also how our reactions to that temperament shape the child, right? So it's not just, oh, the parent keeps reinforcing this, it's all the parent's fault. And it's also not, oh, well, my child's just anxious, so I need to protect them all the time. Jenna and I are always talking about the importance of balance here, right? And recognizing it's really an interaction between the two. So if you have that temperament of a child, their separation anxiety phase might last a little longer at preschool drop off. But all that's going to tell me isn't an alarm like, oh my goodness, my kid has anxiety disorder. It's going to tell me, oh, I have to be even more intentional about not letting my kid avoid and about not letting validation turn into constantly providing reassurance that's kind of sending the message, oh, this is something scary. You're right.
Got it. And let's say now as a parent, we've been supporting our child and being mindful of, what to offer them and how to help them. And we see that it's not going away. At what point should a parent start thinking, I need to speak to my pediatrician about this?
Do you want to take it first, Jenna, or do you want me to?
Yes, sorry, I'm being distracted by my 3 kids upstairs right now. They sound like elephants. I don't know how little people can be so loud. So I apologize. Yeah, I mean, so there's never any harm in bringing up concerns with your pediatrician, right? I mean, early intervention is always so helpful. Yeah, I mean, I always go back to like, how much is this getting in the way? So if you're finding that on a daily basis, your family is kind of thinking about that anxiety, right? It's not just something that happens every once in a while, but it's starting to be a part of your life. I think that to me would be a sign that, hey, like maybe there's some tools out there that I could learn and that could help support my child, because this is something that's trickier for them.
And this is something too where I think, you know, there's so much of the intervention for anxiety with kids, you know, like 70% of the intervention is really the work with parents, right? So if you reach out at the earlier stages, the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to have some really great tools, maybe to work on your own anxiety and on anxiety that your kid probably would have faced in typical development anyway, but you just have even more powerful tools. The thing that we would caution against is that if you Google anxiety, you're going to get 1,000 responses that all vary from each other. And there might be a million blogs, but there's only a handful of evidence-based treatments, right? And so and some of them might actually increase your own anxiety, which then increases your kids' anxiety. So it's just this vicious cycle. So something we're really passionate about is like just slowing down the typing and the scanning and the scrolling, and look at what's evidence-based. If you look at cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Even if your kid's not in intervention, even if you don't end up going that route, if you look at things that are based on that model, then you're on the right track.
So there are two things that you touched upon that I'd like to elaborate a bit more on.
Yeah.
One question that I've received a few times was a parent who has anxiety themselves and being worried that they bring this on their own child. They had young children. I guess it goes back to what I said at the beginning of this meeting, where I said, you know, we have to take care of ourselves if we want to be able to help our children. But what advice would you give to a parent who's perhaps listening and saying, I know that I have anxiety. What can I do now to make sure that I don't put my own anxieties on my child?
Yeah, I love this, because one of our big things that Jenna and I always come back to is parents have to be okay for kids to be okay. And I love that you started tonight's conversation that way, because I wanted to hold up pom-poms. So yeah, you know, working with kids is never working with kids. And actually, when I'm talking to parents about interventions they're seeking out, if you're seeking out intervention and the interventionist or the therapist is just working with the kid and you're not a huge part of that, right? That's usually an alarm going off in my head, an alarm I should listen to this time, right? That this might not be an evidence-based treatment, because all of the manualized treatments have a heavy parent component. And in doing that, the clinician really should have a systems focus, meaning that they are going to know, like when they do their first conversation with you, oh, you also suffer from anxiety. Okay, how is that being dealt with? Am I going to assist you with that? Or are we going to have another team member come on and make sure that this whole system needs to be wrapped around, and that includes the parents? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. Like, and I think it's important as well. You know, you're talking about the parent being so involved, but it's funny because I was working with, during my PhD, teenagers and young adults. So anywhere between 15, 16 to 25-ish. And it doesn't matter how old you are. It's when you're, especially when it's, mental illness, you need your support team, your family, the people around you to be on board, because we've noticed whether it was taking medication and being consistent on that, if the family and the people around them weren't part of it, then it wouldn't work, right? So it's interesting that you're mentioning the parents, and I completely agree that it's a huge part. You also touched upon CBT, cognitive behavioral training. For somebody who's never heard of that, can you explain a little bit more about that and what it looks like?
Yeah. Jenna, do you want to go? Do you want me to go?
Absolutely.
And then we'll go into the questions.
Sure.
Yeah. And, I want to go back real quickly to your last question about parents with anxiety. As I've experienced I struggled with anxiety throughout my life. And so, being very mindful of that with my own kids. For me, what that looks like is being very aware of how I may be reinforcing anxiety for my kids. So, we talk a lot about bravery in our house and modeling that bravery. Me talking about, hey, I feel anxious and I'm going to do this anyway because I'm going to be really brave right now. And then just being really aware of my reactions to things. So when my child falls down, not having this really, really exaggerated reaction, even if internally I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
And really waiting for my child to show me if they need support or how they need that. So that's, you could expand that to other areas with anxiety as well. So cognitive behavioral therapy is really, it's a treatment for anxiety and depression. And it's really based on this idea that our thoughts, our behaviors, and our actions are all linked together. So in a situation, we always have a thought first, and that, you know, if I see a dog, my thought might be, this dog is going to bite me. That's going to lead to feelings, internal sensations of anxiety, and then my behavior is going to be to run away. And so we want to shift the thoughts. So having more realistic, helpful thoughts, like this dog is likely friendly. Most dogs I've met are friendly. I saw this other person petting this dog, so there's evidence that this dog is friendly. Then also shifting behavior as well. So actually just practicing doing things that are scary and not avoiding or engaging in compulsive behaviors to minimize anxiety. So I'd say that's like the basics of CBT.
And can I jump in, Jenna, just to parallel that, because we were talking about parents along with that. You know, I think parents, when I work with parents, I always have their own triangle going on too, right? So you see your child start to cry at daycare separation, right? So what thought do you have? Oh my gosh, our attachment is going to be damaged forever. I just read all of these posts about how if I, you know, I need to protect my child from all the stress so we don't damage our attachment long term, right? I need to validate. And then our behavior is to provide reassurance. And then, you know, and it goes around and around and around we go. And so if we don't deal with that triangle as well that's going inside of the parents, we actually can't deal with the child triangle either.
That's so important. Even when Jenna was talking about like a child getting hurt, I'm stuck in that sort of like, oh my gosh, you're gonna fall, you're gonna get hurt. And you know, it's only now that my husband's been home for a few months, it was this summer at some point, he's like, it's worse than I thought. And I had two of my kids get really badly hurt from falling, and it's almost like now they just like climb one step and I'm like, just go carefully, slowly. And so I realized it was interesting because I've never been diagnosed with anxiety, but I know that I've struggled internally with anxiety. And it was only recently now that I'm on a waiting list because I'm like, okay, if I don't deal with this, now they're afraid of doing things. And I've noticed that it's been moving on to my middle child. And, you know, so I said, if I don't deal with that, the kind of like, you know, then they're going to have that too. So I think it's important for us to also have that internal talk, and that, you know, if we don't know, maybe we are part of that triangle, and maybe we are, like you said, at daycare, and, you know, it's taking the time to acknowledge it and to be mindful of it too. That makes a big difference.
Yeah. And to Shanna's point, the temperament, my girls have very different temperaments, where one, like, she is easy peasy in terms of like anxiety, right? Like and then my other one, she's already like passes out from shots and needles. She's 2 years old and has the vasovagal response. Yeah. So we've got like these very different temperaments in our house. And so I have to be more mindful with my kiddo who's probably more maybe genetically like me in that trajectory. Compared to my other child who hasn't ever met a stranger, you know? So it's just, it's very different how those things can interact.
Yeah. I'm going to start now with a few questions. So we have here, how do we explain to young children, so let's say 5 years old, the concept of anxiety? Which is a great question. How would you explain that to a child?
So I like to do 2 things, or 3 things, I guess. I'll give you 3 quick tools. One is the fire alarm analogy. So I use that with kids. You know, they're usually familiar with a smoke detector. And so you can, depending on their cognitive ability, talk about it's like your brain's smoke detector, but it's going off when the toaster is cooking toast instead of when there's a fire, or, you know, or like when you light a candle, there's not really a problem, but it's making it go off. I also like to use a fear thermometer. So just drawing a thermometer and having them learn to differentiate their worries from like a 0 to a 10, so that they can learn that not everything is a 10. Because in the moment it might feel like a 10, but when you can actually have them say, well, what's scarier, drop off at school or playing, you know, with the boy down the street, or, you know, whatever else they might feel slightly nervous about. So doing that. And then giving worry a name, or giving their anxiety a name, depersonalizes it. So I'm no longer my anxiety, like my anxiety is this other thing. and I can talk back to it. I can ignore it. I can do other things with it, like, but it's not me. So worry bug or anxiety monster, or even a silly name like Sally or Alex, the anxiety boy. I mean, whatever, you know, kids can get silly with it, but just having, and they can draw it, and then like that's their, or worry bully is a common one that kids like to use. So those are
And that's
some.
actually one of the character thing for me is so powerful. And it reminds me a little bit, Jenna, of some of the reading that you sent us earlier from the articles about mindfulness. You know, there's been some studies to suggest that even in cognitive behavioral therapy versus some other therapies that are more about mindfulness focus, there's an angle of maybe cognitive behavioral therapy works because by identifying your thoughts, right, and separating them out, naturally, just by being able to call it something and go, oh, my brain is saying this to me, my anxiety is saying this to me, you get some distance from it. And with distance, you get to choose. You get to choose, is this a worry I'm going to go with? Or is this something where, oh, my worry is just talking to me again, but I'm good, I'm going to keep going, right? Rather than letting that worry just take you along for a ride because you're so attached to it all the time, right?
I
And so
love
some of my favorite art my kids have made are little booklets where they name these characters in the head and they draw them. What would she be wearing? You know, what does her voice sound like when she's trying to, you know, and then we act it out and get silly. And that really can create that distance. It's not pushing it away, but it's recognizing that it's not one and the same as you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you do that with a child? I'm just curious, who also experiences who's very sensitive and experiences a lot of sadness all the time. That's their go-to emotion. Can you give it a name and have them draw it as well?
Oh,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
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 I mean, this is why when Inside Out, I remember when my husband took me to see Inside Out in the movie theater, right? I think he stared at me more than the movie because he knew I was going to be so excited, right? Because that's what that movie did.
Yeah.
It did that so brilliantly. Like
Yeah.
we all have this cast of characters in our mind, and sometimes they have great scripts for us that are helpful, and sometimes they're just jabbering, and we get to choose, right?
I love how it also contrasts. We have the books as well. There's like a little book set that has the different characters.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how in the books it illustrates, let's say an example, a hippopotamus could be super cute to Joy, and she's like, oh, a hippopotamus. But then Fear sees a hippopotamus. So it's like, I love that I'm able to show my kids that one thing could bring joy to one person, fear to another, disgust to another. Like, it's just interesting. Like, we play a game with that book, with this collection of books. So like we can be outside and my daughter will be like, I'm joy, I'm so happy it's sunny. And my son's like, I'm anger, why is it sunny today? So I think that helps a child really understand like the range of emotions. Like you said, it brings them outside too, which is kind of cool for a young kid.
And sometimes those can actually happen in the same person. It's not even separate characters, right? Like I'm a foster parent, and I know like prior to visitation, right, with bio family that maybe in the past has been abusive or something like that, my kids will feel both excitement and fear. They will feel, and the moment that they can start to articulate that, because they have a little bit of distance from it, to be able to say like, I'm excited and this, and they'll draw pictures of their feelings combining together, like this swirl of emotions together, right? It's sophisticated stuff that 5 and 6-year-old kids can learn.
So we can start this very young with our kids.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess we don't even need to wait they don't have to have a diagnosis. If you want to help them understand their emotions a lot more, this is such great advice that we can apply to all our young kids.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. And one of the things that's on SHANNA and I's list is to make an anxiety e-course for parents to provide them with information on anxiety, a lot of what we've been talking about here, because a lot of it is, and I honestly, I think it's for any parent. These are not things that your child has to have a diagnosis or meet clinical criteria for. These are all just really great emotional awareness, emotion regulation skills that we could, like, I wish I could go back to my 5-year-old self and give them to her, you know, that, you know, I think a lot of kids and families could benefit from.
I think the prevalence rates of anxiety also, there's a much higher rate of subclinical, right? I think there was an article that I sent you, I was reading before. And so, you know, these are kids that are kind of under the radar and experiencing enough of the symptom to maybe not cause them maybe they're still able to function, but it's there, it's present.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think especially right now, that's going to be harder to differentiate, right? Because everyone is anxious right now. I mean, doing this work pre-pandemic and during pandemic, the work is very different right now because no one's totally okay. Of course, no one is totally okay. So these tools, this is for essentially everyone right now, right? Like, how are we going to recognize our thought patterns? How are we going to realize that we can feel this and that at the same time and still engage in our life, right?
If anybody has a question, please post it before we end up and we end the chat soon. Can we elaborate a little bit more on that before we end COVID, pre-COVID, and now? Have you been, are numbers changing in terms of the cases and, children with anxiety? Is there something that as a parent right now we should be maybe more vigilant for or more aware of given the current situation?
Yeah,
I'm
I
going
would
to let Shanna answer this one because she's seeing a lot more clients than I am right now.
So I'll speak to, my clients first and what we're seeing. So I have a lot more families, which is part of the reason we want to make some of these tools more accessible, because, not everyone can access or not necessarily needs to access like full-blown therapy, but there's a lot more people reaching out for help. But what I've seen in the families that I am working with is that there are new behaviors emerging. So I work predominantly with kids with pretty challenging behaviors. And so we have a kid that maybe already had big emotions, and typically they came out as anger, but now we also have some OCD, like obsessive compulsive types of behaviors, or severe separation anxiety. And so this is actually an important point, that with my kiddos who used to have externalizing, acting out behaviors, right, arguing, hitting, that kind of stuff, their anxiety can look different, right? So severe levels of control seeking are what several of my kiddos are doing right now, which when we dug a little deeper was like, well, you can't leave, or nobody else can come near our door, right? It makes sense given what's going on, but it looks like anger, it looks like defiance, it looks like control, right? So these are the types of things that I'm seeing more of clinically. And in terms of things that you can do, I would say that the more that you can stick to your routine.
Okay. Yeah.
Routine, we do a program called the Incredible Years and PCIT, and routines and schedules are typically one module of that, one component. And it used to take one session. And during pandemic, I'm taking like 3-4 weeks sometimes to work on that with parents, because now it's, how do we make sure that our kids are getting outside every day? How do we make sure that we keep some kind of semblance of a normal rhythm for our kids, a new normal, but a normal rhythm? And we stick to that, even if our kids feel anxious or scared, or we want to give them a break because it's so hard. Kids are resilient when they have the proper tools, right? And so they can get through this, right? As long as we give them the semblance of a typical, predictable rhythm they can count on.
That's good advice. I think that was the biggest thing in terms of questions that I would get at the beginning of COVID. It was the change of routine that just threw everything off. So I think that's a really valid point. And especially now here with schools closing, then they're opening again for us. It's just flip-flop back and forth with young kids, with older kids. So it's so hard to maintain a routine when there's uncertainty of what's going to happen the next day. Am I learning through Zoom? Am I in the classroom? Am I in my home? Am I, so it's hard to keep that, but, perhaps having some sort of large routine, a big scheme of things where, like a bit of outdoor play, a little bit of, school at home, something, but it's important to try to maintain that.
Even if the specifics look different, if, whether it's physically in a school building or at home, this is the time that we basically wake up. We always do recess. Sometimes it's in our backyard, sometimes it's on a playground, right?
Okay, I love that. So just one last question here. So how do we help young children differentiate between healthy COVID hand washing versus overwashing due to fear and anxiety? Child has been showing extreme concern about this the last 1.5 weeks. So what can we do in that case?
Jenna, you want me to take it? I have one of these guys.
Sure, yeah.
I have one right now. We made it a visual on our routine. So we made it a visual on our routine of, here are the times that all the doctors have said we need to wash our hands, right? So our coming home routine is we walk in the door and they all have equal weight, right? We take our shoes off, we hang up our coat, we pump the Purell or we wash our hands. Then we move on, right? We go to a playground, we take one, and it just becomes a script, right? It becomes a script because when you're anxious, you can't problem solve very well in that moment, right? I don't know if you've heard of the lid flipping type of idea, big emotions, right? Yeah. It prevents you from fully processing, what's going on. Mm-hmm. So the benefit of it being a routine that way and these kind of memorized rules is that they don't have to process it in that moment of anxiety because it's just part of their rhythm. I come in, I wash my hands, we move on. Yeah. And so making that visual and concrete is a really good first go-to.
I love that. And last one, how do we stop them from excessive hand washing? So let's say that is a routine, but then they're always wanting to, I'm assuming from this, want to go that extra mile with the hand washing. How can we get the child to kind of bring it back down to a level where maybe it was before? So if we already had that routine, but now they want to wash their hands extra.
Yeah. This is something that I would probably want to consult specifically on because that sounds like it would be heading towards the point of maybe needing some extra help, right? If it's really so if your child's not responding to simple redirection and they're actually becoming distressed when you try to say like, oh baby, you don't need to wash your hands now. We did the coming home routine already. Your hands are good. And that's not enough, right? So they can't be redirected back to regular routine in life. That's when I would seek out some extra help. But to give you an idea of what that might look like, that's when we would be talking about, really identifying the anxiety character, the worry character. And then we would be going on to maybe developing some systems of rewarding moments when they are washing their hands at a time when they're like, oh, this is your brain telling you this is a healthy thing to do. You're being healthy right now. Oh, this is your brain trying to trick you. Oh, and you recognized it. Well done. And trying to do some of that really, really explicit training.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. We're going to elaborate on childhood anxiety this week. And like you said, there's some studies that I'll be summarizing. So I hope that this week on Instagram can give you also a bigger picture and a bit more information to help you out. For those of you who are new, like I said, every single Monday at 8:30, we meet, we have a different chat. And so hold on, sorry, I just got to plug my computer. And next week we are chatting with another psychologist, and we're talking about character skills. So if you're interested in learning a bit more about various skills and resilience and empathy and so on, and how can I build this with my child through play, join us next week at 8:30. And you can visit curiousneuron.com. There are a few handouts and replays there. And if you can't make it every night, we have a membership as well, which is all on the website. So I hope that you enjoyed tonight's webinar. Thank you so much, Jenna and Shanna. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So fun. Nice to see you.
And I am looking forward to learning more from you guys this week.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.